Hey there, if you are working on requirements or are associated with the requirements or are challenged by requirements, or if you're a project manager dealing with the requirements, or if you're acting in the project management role and you're dealing with the requirements, or you're a business analyst and you're dealing with requirements, or you're acting like a business analyst and you're dealing with requirements, then this user group is for you. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about what I call the 3 requirement secrets. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you some of the best information that I offer to students in classes that I teach. I train thousands of students. And so what I want to do right now is kind of give you some of the very best information that I can put together for you. And hopefully it will help you and anybody that you're working with make the process more efficient, more successful. All right, so let me talk about what we're going to be doing here in this little user group. First of all, there's 3 parts. So, what are requirements? Why should you care, and how does it work? So let me start off with what are requirements. And as you probably already know, a requirement is a statement, generally a statement of need or functionality or capability, and it's usually given by a stakeholder to someone like us, and then we write it down, and then we turn it over to somebody else at its simplest level. But if you're like me and you've dealt with stakeholders, you've probably thought to yourself, requirements, requirements, requirements. And you thought to yourself, could it get any harder? I mean, conceptually, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, you take what somebody wants and you build it, right? I mean, that's what we're supposed to do. But it doesn't always work out that way, does it? So why should you care? Well, a couple of things. As we get into this, the first thing I want to do is kind of set you up to, your brain at ease, and sort of set you up to kind of really absorb what we're going to talk about here. And the first thing I want you to do is have what I call a mindset of measurement. All right. And the very first measurement that we're going to talk about is number one reason why projects get canceled is due to incomplete and missing requirements. And if you've ever dealt with requirements, I'm sure you are aware of that. That's probably affected you more than once on many of the projects that you work with. So why me? Why am I the guy to talk to you about requirements? Well, first off, I've trained thousands of professionals like you to do more with less, basically by working smarter. No new hardware, no new software, just taking what you got and figuring out a better way to do it. And in doing so, it's going to help you become better at eliciting and analyzing and documenting and validating requirements. My background is that I came out of, first network troubleshooting in the early 90s into, a support environment, and then eventually built myself a software company that specialized in workflow automation software robots. In the process of doing that, I had to go out and elicit thousands of requirements in order to build these systems. And what I learned was pretty amazing. You'd probably be surprised or not that most people don't operate really efficiently. And what I found out was that, when you go to build software to replace work that a human's doing, humans and computers don't work the same way. And I'll give you an example. Humans are able to take a command like, hey, can you go do this or get this for me? And it might be vague, and they pretty much can figure it out, right? They can take what you're asking and go figure it out. But a machine can't do that. You have to be really specific with machines. You have to tell them exactly what you want to do. And so what I meant was that, that software robots don't operate like humans, in that robots need exact instructions, which we call requirements. So what we found, and what you're probably experiencing, is the challenge of how do you take the vague generality from the human and turn it into what we call the meaningful specific of the system. And that's where I'm going to keep talking about this, which I call the measurement mindset, or a mindset of measurement, comes in handy. The good news is you don't have to be born that way. It's something that you can develop over time, especially if you know that's what you need to do. And that's what I'm hoping you'll take away from this. So we're going to talk about is really just three things. Again, mindset of measurement. First of all, I'm going to teach you to know the difference between a request versus a requirement. I'm going to show you how to break down your elicitation process to what we call discrete transactions that you can do over and over and over again. And that'll help you actually elicit better information because you're doing it more often. And then finally, mindset of measurement, we're going to talk about how you benchmark your team and yourself to improve performance. So there's really three secrets, as I mentioned, and let's start with secret number one, which is you can't test a request. You'll notice that there's a little waiter and or waitress or whoever, order taker, right? They're taking an order. And the big challenge that I find with students when they come in is the understanding the difference between what's a request and what's a requirement. And it's really a mindset. And so I always tell everybody, you can't test a request. So let me tell you where that comes from. Starting with the order taker. Most of the time, those of us who are in the requirements business, we're told, hey, go gather the requirements, like go pick them up from somebody. And the truth of the matter is you can't really do it that way. Requirements come from human beings, i.e. stakeholders generally, and those requirements are given to you in some fashion, usually verbally, from somebody who says, hey, I need you to do this. And it might be in the form of, hey, we need you to make it better, or make it easier, or make it faster. Or they'll say, well, I wanted to do this, or I needed to do that. And that's great. In their mind, they think they're giving you a requirement, but they think they're giving you something specific that you can go build. In reality, what they're really giving you is a request, because they haven't, most of the time, given you any way to measure what it is they're asking for. So when they tell you make it better, they're not telling you how you're going to measure that. When they say make it easier, they're not necessarily telling you, oh, here's how we're going to measure easier. They're just saying go do it. When they say I want, I need, whatever. So this again, where is the whole mindset of measurement comes in, is that you as the analyst have to kind of figure that out. And that's really going to be part of your responsibility. Now, if they have that information and they can provide it to you, man, that's awesome. That's the best thing you can get. But most of the time, probably the vast majority of the time, stakeholders aren't going to know. And so again, it's really up to you to start thinking in terms of measurement. How are we going to measure this? And the way you remember it is you cannot test a request. All right, so how do you get to this? What do you got to do? Well, probably the easiest thing you can do is anytime someone asks you for something or to do something that they think is a requirement, you respond with a question. And the question is pretty straightforward. I call it the AMB, or as measured by question. So when someone says, hey, we want you to make this easier, we'll use that as an example. You can ask the question, as measured by what? Or as measured by how? What you're trying to do is move the conversation into a format where you can actually get the stakeholder to talk about measurement. Because at the end of the day, that's what we're going to test against, is some sort of measurement. And therein lies kind of the big challenge of requirements, is that usually when requirements are given to us, they're not in any kind of format that we can test and or validate. So we got to convert that mentally into some kind of metric. You know, in my classes, I'm always talking about different kinds of metrics. And the basic simple ones are, you know, if it's a noun or an object, that would be like a unit count, or if it's a verb, it would be something like duration. The most common metrics, though, other than, you know, unit counts and durations, are going to be what I call quality metrics. And quality generically meaning just measurement, different kinds of things that you're going to make up. For example, you might have a survey with a scale on it from, you know, when someone says make it better, you might have a 3-number scale where, you know, good, better, and best. So good might be 1, better might be 2, and best might be 3. And you may go in and clearly articulate what is the definition of good, what's the definition of better, what's the definition of best, and how you would measure those things. And that would be a component that you would then use in your requirement statement to then provide that to your testers so that they can go back and check against what the original requirement was. So again, mindset of measurement, it all is part of this, what we're trying to get you to do. So just remember, as measured by what? And just add it as a question. It's really easy. Stakeholder says, we need this to do such and such. Great. As measured by what? And the measurement can be any number of things. So it doesn't have to be a stopwatch, like there's a stopwatch example right here, but it doesn't have to be a stopwatch. Like I said, it could be a survey or questionnaire or some kind of scale that you create. The worst thing that can happen to you is when a stakeholder says, when you ask, hey, it's measured by what? And they answer with, I'll know it when I see it. Just go do this. That's the worst thing that can happen. We have a word for that. We call that the George Jetson. And you can see on the slide, there's a picture of the Jetsons, in case you're not familiar with the Jetsons. It's a really old cartoon from the 1950s, or excuse me, 1960s. And in the Jetsons, they're a futuristic family. And at the end of every episode, the father, George Jetson's out walking his dog, Astro, on a space treadmill. So you can see the picture of George walking the dog. And eventually the dog takes off after a cat and leaves George running on the treadmill, going nowhere, yelling, Jane, get me off this crazy thing. And he's just running. And that's what happens to you as an analyst or a project manager, whoever, when someone gives you what I call a vague generality request, and then tells you, when you ask them, how do you want to measure this? When they respond with, oh, I'll know it when I see it, they've put you on a treadmill that you can never get off. Okay, so again, mindset of measurement is the solution to this. As long as you keep thinking that requirements are measurements, it's going to really serve you well as an analyst or anybody whose job it is to go elicit requirements. The last part, or one of the last parts of this first section, this first secret, is I always tell people, write requirements as though they're going directly to quality assurance and testing. I know that for most people who are writing requirements, we're writing them for the people whose job it is to build the solution, whatever that solution might be. And that's fine, but understand that those folks, the people who are building the solution, they know how to build what they're trying to build. Okay, so again, as an analyst, your job isn't to tell them how to build something. Your job is to tell them what the stakeholders want. Since they already know how to build it, what you really want to do then is write the requirement statement for the person or people or group or whoever, the individuals whose job it is to either perform quality assurance or testing. Again, mindset of measurement. So one of the things I'm always telling my students is, hey, go talk to the people in QA and test and see what they say. Hey, can you test this statement? And they'll joke and say, no, I can't test a request. They may not do that, but trust me, they'll be like, well, no, that's probably not written clear enough for us to test it as it's written. And that's where I always joke about, hey, you can't test a request. So again, keep in mind that ultimately what you want to do is get the buy off or the sign off of the folks who have to test it. And that's going to help you write a better statement up front, which will save you time and basically eliminate the rework of going through the process, getting it to QA, and then having them say, no, this doesn't work. And then you got to go back and start the process all over again because you weren't clear up front. So the idea is to eliminate that rework right at the very beginning. The last part of this is, again, mindset of measurement. Remember, requirements is a numbers game. These statements of measurement ultimately can, be seen as some kind of a number. Maybe not math. I'm not talking about mathematics. I'm just talking about, a categorization number, like 1 is yes and, 0 is no, or something like that. So just keep in mind that you can take plain generic words and give them numbers to correspond, like, good, better, and best can have a number associated with them. And I always tell people the game is rigged against you when you don't realize you're in a game, meaning as an analyst, our job is to see numbers that other people don't see. And the good news is you don't have to be that kind of person naturally, because I know I wasn't when I started. That's something that you can learn to do as you go through and you start practicing. So the more you can see a requirement statement as a measurement or a metric, the better it's going to serve you, and you'll start to realize, yeah, it's a numbers game, and of course I see all these numbers, so it makes it easier for me to operate within the game. All right, now that leads me to the next thing. So my next secret, the higher up you go, the less time you get, the more time you prep. All right, so again, mindset of measurement. So let me tell you where this comes from. So if you've ever dealt with an executive, and my experience has been that, I ask people, hey, when you go to see your executives, how much time do they give you? And some people say, well, our executives have an open door policy and they'll give us as much time as we need. And I say, okay, well, let me pose the question a different way. Imagine for a moment that your executive was only going to give you, let's say, 5 minutes of their time, which is not unrealistic with how busy executives are. The real question is, would you only spend 5 minutes getting ready for it? And the answer everybody says is no. And then I'll say, well, how much time would you spend? And they'll say, as much time as it takes, or as much time as necessary. Exactly. The higher up you go, the less time you get, the more time you're going to prep, right? Especially if it's a career defining meeting. Let's say that this meeting is going to really determine whether or not you even get to keep your job. So, obviously that's something that you're going to spend a lot of energy on. What I really want you to take away from this secret is the idea of what we call prep, just preparation. And it's one of the key functions or key things that I teach people in a class about how to be efficient. There's only two. One's designed for reuse, and then this one is called prep in advance. But anyway, just want you to keep that in mind. So where did this come from? This idea of the higher up you go, less time you get, more time you prep. Well, as I've been out eliciting requirements, I mentioned I listen to thousands of requirements to go out and do this. I learned a couple of things, which I'm going to talk about. One is the 1 hour meeting. 2 is managing time wasters, and 3 is surveys. Normally in a class when I'm teaching this to people, I'll usually ask them, how much time do you normally schedule for an interview? And across thousands of students, the average is 1 hour. Great, no problem there. But I want you to remember that because, again, I'm going to come back and address that here in a moment. Second thing I usually ask students is, have you ever had someone come to your office and waste your time? And of course, every hand goes up. And I'll say, well, give me a technique that you use to keep a time waster out of your office. And of course, everybody has a technique for managing time wasters. So that's the second thing I want you to keep in mind. And then the last thing I'll ask, and I'll say, this is not a trick question. I'll say, can you say that a survey is a document used to elicit information? And of course, the answer is yes. So then I point out that any document can be used as a survey to elicit information. So that's the third point I want you to keep in mind. Now I want to talk about my own experience with elicitation in the software company that I had before I started teaching people. So as the owner of the business, I had a small software company and my staff was very, very technical. And of course, technical people tend to be very literal and really, quite honestly, many of them are shy. So what we did to make things very simple was we built a questionnaire, which is what, if you go to any book on elicitation, that's what they tell you to do. Put together a questionnaire, schedule the interview. No big deal. So I took my analyst, I gave them the questionnaire, and I said, go schedule the interview with the stakeholder. And of course, they, 1 hour meeting, and they came back, and no big deal. So they went off to do the interview, and then they came back, and 2 things occurred. Number 1, they didn't have all the questions on the questionnaire completed, and number 2, we couldn't get back in the door. And in the course of doing business, lots of things are blowing up. So I just took that as, okay, this is, stuff that's happening, no big deal. Another time, a similar situation, I send an analyst out with a questionnaire. They come back, they don't have the questions answered. We can't get back in the door. Again, I don't think anything of it, just stuff's blowing up in the business. That's how things happen. The third time it happened, though, I sensed a pattern, but I still had no idea what was going on. And then one day, I went out with my analyst on what I call a ride along, which is, hey, let's go to lunch, go visit the stakeholder together. And the way we did it was I would go with the analyst and I would act just simply as the note taker. And we always tell people, the reason the note taker sits there and doesn't say anything is because when 2 people interview one person, it's not really an interview as much as it becomes an interrogation. So in our situation, I just sat there quietly and I took notes. All right. Now, this is how this works. When I walk into your office, let's say anybody walks into your office, you basically are in control in your office. I mean, I ask that question to people all the time, and they're like, yep, I'm in control in my office. I say, great. When I sit across the desk from you and I start to ask you questions, I have just taken control. Now, most people don't think about that, but that's really what happens. And I didn't notice it until the meeting went something like this. I'm sitting next to my analyst, and my analyst starts asking questions. And it went like question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. And then it went question, question. And what happened was the moment that the stakeholder answered a question with another question, they took control back. And when they took control back, they said, hey, we got to end this meeting. I got to go do something else. Can we reschedule? And they kicked us out of their office. And what I realized is I was being kicked out of their office was they just branded us as time wasters, never to get back in their office again. There's a word for this, and the word is called cognitive dissonance, which basically means something doesn't feel right. And that's what happened. When we walked in their office and we sat down and started asking them questions, we had taken control from them inside of their domain of control. Now, I always joke with people, I'm like, where is this written in any book? Because it's not. I mean, all the books that I teach from that talk about eliciting requirements, in particular the interview, no one ever brings up the fact that when you're sitting across someone's desk and you start asking them questions, you've psychologically taken control from them and created what's known as cognitive dissonance in the meeting. Now, I didn't know this until I got kicked out. I didn't even think about it. So as it came on later on, I realized, wow, I got a problem here. This is a big problem. And there was a couple problems. One, probably the biggest problem was that my analysts, when they're by themselves, didn't really know how to address this because, again, being very literal, that question was not on their questionnaire. And when it got to that, and they got asked a question from another question, they just looked at me and sort of shrugged like, what do I do? What do I do now? So we had to kind of change things around. All right, so what we did was we came up with what we call prep drills. The 2, 10, 30 prep drills. And really there's just two, the 2-minute drill and the 10-minute drill. 30s, we'll talk about that later. So, but the main thing I want you to keep in mind is that these prep drills don't replace anything else that you're doing. Okay, you're still going to have interviews, you're still going to run workshops, you're still going to do, all the other elicitation methods that you might do, prototyping, benchmarking, reverse engineering, anything that you're going to do. All we're saying is the more prepared you are in advance, the better those events are going to work. Okay, that's really what we're talking about here, is just prep in advance. How do you do it? All right, so the first thing we did was we came back and we started thinking about, what's the biggest problem that we had to overcome? And the biggest problem was really the 1-hour meeting. And there's two problems associated with a 1-hour meeting. Okay, so let me tell you what they are. The first problem is this. The higher up you go in the org chart, the further out in the future 1 hour is. So when you say to an executive, hey, I'd like to get on your schedule, and you say, well, how much time do you need? They go, well, 1 hour. And they're like, sure, 6 months from now. And of course, your sponsor said, when did you need that problem fixed? And your sponsor's like, yesterday. So 6 months from now isn't acceptable, right? Which brings me to the second problem of the 1-hour meeting, and it's this. People love to schedule and then reschedule and then reschedule 1-hour meetings. So what would happen is you'd wait however much time to get to that executive meeting, and then you thought, okay, we're finally going to meet, and you get a call from their administrator, and they say, oh, I'm sorry, we have to reschedule. So they push it out even further. So those two things really hurt us from, the perspective of trying to get information very, very quickly. So remember I said everybody has a technique for managing time wasters. Well, there's a technique, it's a famous technique that executives are trained on called the telephone technique. And this is where the 2-minute drill came from. And it works like this. Executives are trained to manage time wasters in their office using their telephone. And here's how it works. When you walk into an executive's office, you basically give what's called your 30-second elevator speech, which is when you come in and you tell them, here's what I think I'm going to be able to accomplish, or what I need, or whatever it is in the first 30 seconds. And they decide right then and there whether this meeting is going to go forward. And at the 120-second mark, you could set your watch by it, their phone magically rings. And what's really funny about that is here's how they run the meeting. They answer the phone, and they simply, if they like what you said in the 30 seconds, they say into the phone, hey, I'm sorry, I'm in a meeting. Can you call me back? That gives you the green light to go forward. However, if they want to kick you out of their office, they simply go, I'm sorry, I got to take this call. Can we reschedule? And they just booted you out of their office. And it's very diplomatic, and you don't even know what's happened. And I always laugh. I'm like, but it's a setup. Anyway, people always say to me, well, what can you get done in 2 minutes or less? And I say a lot if you are prepped in advance. This comes back to the statement where any document can act as a survey to elicit information. Okay, so we talked about the 1-hour meeting. We talked about, everybody has a technique for time wasters. This is where I talked about the survey. Okay, So the 2-minute drill is something that we call simply a small document drill. And the idea is that you bring a very simple document, not a big thick document, but just a couple sheets of paper, maybe a vision scope document, a project charter, stakeholder analysis, or risk analysis, just something real small that you can get real quick feedback on. That's the idea. So the way you set the meeting up is you go to the stakeholder and you say, hey, I'd like to get on your schedule. And they say, well, how much time do you need? And you go, 2 minutes. Now remember, the moment you ask for that, you better be prepared with a document, because they might go, okay, come in right now. All right, so just understand this. So whenever you go to ask for your 2-minute drill, make sure you got your document in hand. So whatever they say, we'll come back in 30 minutes or come back in an hour, come back tomorrow, whatever. But you show up for your 2-minute meeting. You say, thank you very much for your time. And what you do is you hand them the document and you say, what I'd like you to do is take a look at this document and let me know. And you ask one question, and it's this: what's missing? Okay, what's missing? Now, let me explain that question with 2 terms. One is called verification and one is called validation. All right. Verification answers the question, is the document correct? Meaning, are there any errors? Validation asks the question or answers the question, is the document complete? Meaning, are there any omissions? So verification and validation is also called errors and omissions. Very simple. Techie guys call it verification and validation. Non-techie people call it errors and omissions. When you hand someone a document and you ask them what's missing, they're going to interpret it either as a verification question, a validation question, or both. You don't care. So you hand them the document, they take it, and they're going to look at it and go, well, this is wrong, and this is missing, and this is wrong. They're going to hand it back to you and be like, okay, I'm done. Get out of my office. Great. That's exactly what you needed. At the end of the 2 minutes, you got options. Basically, option number 1, I'd like to get back on your schedule again. How much time do you need? Another 2 minutes. Option number 2, I'm done. I won't have to bother you again. Thank you very much. I'm out the door. Option number 3, I'd like to get back on your schedule again. How much time do you need? Let's say 10 minutes. Okay. I did that a little backwards. Normally it's leave first, 2 minutes, and then 10 minutes, but either way. So you say, okay, great. So before we get to the 10-minute drill, I want to continue to talk about the 2-minute drill a little bit longer. So I got a little triangle that you can see on the screen, on the slide, and it says 3 words. It says data, information, and knowledge. All right, now, when I was talking about meetings getting canceled and rescheduled, what I usually point out in a classroom with my students is that as a vendor, which I'm an outside vendor, the best I've ever been able to get is what I call 3 one-hour meetings that held in a week. And when I ask students, I say, well, as an outsider, how many meetings do you think will stick for me in your company? People say anywhere from 1 to 2. And I'm like, right, best I ever got was 3. All right. Assume for a moment that I have 15 stakeholders, which is not a big project at all to talk to 15 people. But if you're going 3 meetings per week, you're talking 5 weeks before I get to see everybody one time. And again, the sponsor wanted the project or the problem solved yesterday. So that's not really acceptable. So the idea is to try to get around as many people as possible in the shortest amount of time. That's where the 2-minute drill comes in. All right, now, here's how it works. The first person I meet gives me data. The second person I meet gives me information. The third person gives me knowledge. And then everybody after that gives me wisdom. So it goes like this, meeting 15 people. Data, information, knowledge, wisdom, 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 wisdom. Okay, now I always ask people, 2 minutes times 15 people equals 30 minutes. All right, so that's my first pass. Now, as I'm going through my first pass and I'm meeting people for 2 minutes, I'm also identifying whether or not I need to come back again. Because remember, at the end of the 2 minutes, I can say, hey, thank you very much for your time. I won't bother you again. So let's assume for a moment that after talking to 15 people very quickly, I identify 5 people that I need to go back and meet with again. All right, and let's say that that meeting is going to be what's called a 10-minute drill. Okay. Now, a 10-minute drill is what we call a large document drill. And what you're doing with this is when you bring a bigger document. So you don't run a 2-minute drill with a big document. You only run a 2-minute drill with just smaller single sheets of paper, basically. But let's say you have a big document and you need someone to kind of review it. All right, so the 10-minute drill we also call the power of the red pen. It's a large document drill. Now, normally by the time I get to this in a class, I've explained something about, the navigation of a document. So I'm just going to tell you really quickly. What makes this drill work is the fact that your document has what's called forward navigation, also known as your table of contents. Okay, so, and before I explain it, let me also make this disclaimer. Nothing ever works 100% as advertised, but 9 times out of 10, this is how this drill is going to work. You walk in the door, you say, hey, thank you very much for your time. I'd like to get on your schedule. How much time do you need? 10 minutes. Great. So you come back for the 10-minute meeting, and you show up with a document and a red pen, of course, making sure that the document has a strong table of contents. And the way you do it is this. You say, hey, thank you very much for your time. Here's a document and a red pen. And what I want you to do is just look through the document, take the red pen, and let me know, same question, what's missing? Okay, now, what's really powerful about this is that by handing someone a document and a red pen, you're psychologically giving up control. And that's exactly what you're trying to do. You're trying to eliminate cognitive dissonance before it ever begins. Again, 9 times out of 10, this is how this meeting is going to run. Stakeholder's going to grab your document, going to take your red pen, open it up, and start marking through it. Wrong, wrong, missing, wrong, missing, wrong, wrong, wrong. Great, that's exactly what you need. At the end of the 10 minutes, you got options. Option number 1, thank you very much for your time. I won't bother you again. Option number 2, I'd like to get back on your schedule again for another 10 minutes. Or option number 3, I'd like to get back on your schedule again for, let's say, 30 minutes. Now, we'll talk about 30 minutes here in a second, but understand that, and that's not a drill. That's actually a meeting. But I just want to talk about the 10-minute drill a little bit longer. Same triangle, right? First person I meet gives me data. Second person gives me information. Third one gives me knowledge, and then goes wisdom, wisdom, right? So 5 people times 10 minutes, that's 50 minutes. All right, so I ran a 2-minute drill across 15 people, and I ran a 10-minute drill across 5 people. And just to let you know, I can do all of that basically in about 80 minutes FaceTime with the stakeholders. And I can get that done in a week, which is exactly what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get through a lot of stuff very, very quickly. Okay, now, that brings me to the 30-minute meeting. So when we show up for the meeting, because remember, these are preps for meetings. These are preps for workshops. These are preps for whatever. I usually ask people, if I run a 2-minute drill across 15 people and a 10-minute drill across 5 people, how prepared do you think I am for the 30-minute meeting? And the answer comes back, very prepared. Yep, absolutely. As a matter of fact, sometimes the meeting runs like this. If you think about it, if you take 2 minutes plus 10 minutes, that's 12 minutes. And even together, neither of those really constitutes a meeting on the stakeholder's calendar. Why? Because if you have an electronic calendar and you click new meeting, it's going to pop up with anywhere from 15 to 30 to an hour for your meeting time. It's not going to come up with a 10-minute or 2-minute. Exactly. Those 2-minute drills and 10-minute drills are what we call drop-bys, which you're probably doing. Hey, you got a second? Can you look at this? We just gave a name to them. We said, hey, we're going to make this an actual technique. So the idea is you drop by somebody's office very, very quickly. Now, when I show up for a 30-minute meeting, in the eyes of the stakeholder, that's the first meeting because we never were on their calendar before. So what happens, the meeting goes something like this. We show up and we got all this documentation put together, and they look at it and they go, how did you get all this documentation? We never even saw you. Exactly. And we jokingly call it the magic trick. Okay. So when I tell people, hey, I've elicited requirements, thousands of requirements, and I did it through something called a magic trick, that's where it comes from. Okay. The idea behind it is psychologically, they don't think that they saw you because you moved so quickly through their office. All right. So that's the end of that section. The higher up you go, the less time you get, the more time you prep. That's prep drills. Again, mindset of measurement brings us to the last secret that I got for you. All right. You cannot improve what you do not measure. I can't stress that enough. And as an analyst or a project manager or anybody who's dealing with requirements, understand that at the end of the day, the requirement has to become a measurement of some form in order to pass through test. You as an analyst or the person who's eliciting the requirements, you have to start thinking like this all the way through your process. It's not the kind of thing that happens naturally. It's going to take you practice. And so I'm always telling people you can't improve what you do not measure. So you got to start practicing the idea of measurement, the concept of measurement. Now, I ask people in my classes all the time, I'll say, hey, have you ever benchmarked anything? And a lot of people go, no, I never benchmark. And I'm like, sure you have. You benchmark every day, you just don't realize it. And then I'll say, how many of you have ever used a ruler or a measuring cup? And of course, every hand goes up, right? Everybody's used either a ruler or a measuring cup some point in their life. And I'll say, congratulations, you've all done some form of benchmarking. Because benchmarking is simply some level of measurement. Now, the thing is, the more you do it, the better off you're going to get. And the more you see requirements as metrics that can be benchmarked, the easier it is to elicit them, to see them, to identify them, to document them. Therein lies the real secret to the whole thing, is that you got to quit looking at them as statements of request. Hey, I need this, I want this, I like this, to these are metrics that of some form that can be measured. These are statements of measurement, okay? And that's the idea behind it. Which brings me to this. I say this in every class and to anybody who will listen to me. People talk about plans all the time. I go in, I say, hey, show me your plan. And someone, a project manager, will say, hey, here's my plan. I'll say, great. And I'll start talking to them. I say, well, where did you come up with your information? Well, we sort of made this up, rough order of magnitude estimate. I said, oh, okay, great. And then I point out to them, no matter where you got your information from, the purpose of a plan is to measure actual. So whether you made it up, rough order of magnitude estimate, or you've reused it historically, right, a historical or analogous estimate, whatever the plan is, it's now a tool that you're going to use to measure actual against that plan. And that's a really powerful concept. The more you start seeing that every plan, anytime you hear, oh, we got this plan or that plan or whatever that plan is, you say to yourself, oh, that's the basis or baseline for measurement. Then again, this is another mindset shift that's going to allow you to start seeing everything as metrics that makes it a whole lot easier to manage and control. All right, now, if you've made it this far, and I know I spent a lot of your time with you, if you've made it this far, first of all, thank you for being with me. I congratulate you. I celebrate you for being here. I want you to send me a message at the very end. I'll show you what my message is, and ask for the benchmarking tool, and I will send you the benchmarking tool. And that lets me know that you actually made it through my little presentation here. Which brings me to the last thing. Okay, so let me just tell you what we covered, and then we'll wrap it all up. So we talked about the difference between a request versus a requirement. We showed you how to break down your elicitation process to what I call these discrete 2-minute transactions, these 2-minute drills. And the beauty of the 2-minute drill, and I always like to point out, is 1 hour is the equivalent of 30 2-minute drills. So the idea is that you can, instead of taking an hour of somebody's time, you can run through 2-minute drills multiple times, and that'll give you a lot better information that you can reuse over and over and over again. Every time you move through your process of elicitation, you are in a form of benchmarking. That's the idea, is that benchmarking is a mindset. It's a measurement mindset to always be looking at, hey, how do we measure this, or how do we measure that, or how can we measure things? And I always tell everybody, it's not natural. I mean, it wasn't for me. I didn't naturally go, oh, I'm a measurement kind of person. I had to learn that, and I learned it through repetition. And that's the beauty of it, is I've given you a method that if you break things down into small enough increments, the more you repeat it, the easier it's going to be to learn it. Lastly, what I'd love to do is hear back from you. I want your thoughts. Let me know what you think. You can call me, you can to talk, or you can send me a text message. Hey, just send me a text message. Hey, saw your presentation. Send me the benchmarking tool. Here's my email. You can email me, rfrederick.pnp@outlook.com. You can message me here on LinkedIn. However you want to do it, just let me know. Just say, hey, benchmarking tool, and that lets me know that you made it all the way through. Again, thank you for your time. I appreciate you. I celebrate you. Have a great day.